Hi, this is Paul Christopher Hoppy, aka Giant Buddha from PokerIsASkill.com. Welcome to my new Hand of the Day series. I did a series of these for a full month at Drag the Bar, ending exactly 2 years ago, and I'll see how long I can keep this one going. I'll be mixing in hands from Limit Holdem, maybe some Pot Limit Omaha at some point, but this is a no-limit hand that I just played on Zoom Poker. It's important for me to note that I'm not entirely an expert at this game format, although I have had solid results and have a pretty good understanding of the major concepts. Of course, it always comes down to application, so these videos will be about me learning some of the finer points of the game, as well as teaching some of the basics. This was actually my first hand of the night, perhaps a little straightforward, but there were some useful concepts that came up. Let's get into the action. So I've got 10-9 of hearts here, which is the sort of hand I hope I get a chance to play. It's going to fold around to the button, who opens for 2.5 blinds, and the small blind folds, so I do get to play it. He's pretty tight, the button, 20-17, but I still expect him to have a fairly wide range because he is, after all, opening on the button. So that means that there's going to be a lot of hands that I might be able to get him to fold by 3-betting pre-flop. And there are also going to be a lot of hands that he might call with pre-flop that then he folds the flop. So I'm going to jack it up here to $8, which is, I guess, 8 big blinds. It's a pot-sized raise. I don't really like making a smaller raise out of position. In position, I don't mind doing a little less than 3 times their open raise even, which would be a fair amount smaller than pot, than a full pot-sized raise. But out of position, I want to first of all, I want to discourage him from calling, even though I don't mind if he calls because I can get some folds after the flop. But, overall, we'll just take it to the flop and I'll explain what I mean here. So now there's $16 in the pot and there's 92 in the effective stack, which is my stack. So what that means is I think we have about a 5.5, 5.5 or so. Stack to pot ratio, right? So that means if I hit a top pair hand after 3-betting out of the big blind, I'm not going to feel bad about getting it all in. But say I had only made it about $6 or $7, then the pot would be $13, $14. We'd be looking at closer to a 7-to-1 stack to pot ratio, in which case getting in with a top pair, I'd be giving him much better implied odds on his pre-flop calls and giving him more room to outmaneuver me. Here there's really only going to be room for 3 bets, and they're not always necessarily going to be that large. So the size of your 3-bet really manipulates the ratio between the post-flop pot size and your stack size. So that's pretty important to take into consideration. So here I'm going to c-bet, even though this isn't the best board to do it on. I'm representing an overpair, basically. I could certainly still have hands like ace-king, ace-queen, stuff like that. I can have flush draws, all of those things. But, hopefully, he's just missed this board a lot of the time. The main argument against c-betting is that he'll float here a lot with just any kind of air, any 2 cards, which is certainly a possibility, but this is the sort of player that I don't necessarily expect that much creativity out of, so I think I can get him to fold his random Broadway hands like a king-queen or like a jack-10 or queen-10 suited, stuff like that, maybe some ace-high. His pairs are going to call, but on certain turn cards I'm going to be able to barrel and get him to fold those pairs. So I do bet. The bet size is important. You don't want to bet too much. Just a little over half pot is really enough to do the trick. No matter what, we're going to be able to get stacks in by the river if we want, whether it's for value or as a bluff. So you really don't have to risk that much here on the flop. It doesn't tend to make too big of a difference to what his calling range is going to be. Like if I bet 11, he's probably not calling fewer hands really than if I bet 9. So anyway, he does call. When he calls, I think his range probably isn't a bunch of overcard junk. I think he's got some small pairs, maybe some draws, although I think there's a good chance that he would semi-bluff with some draws. Maybe some ace-high type hands that he is thinking about showing down. Maybe if he called with a hand like ace-4 or ace-deuce and he has a gut shot plus ace-high to show down value, stuff like that. But for the most part, I think he could have, say, an 8, like an 8-9 suited. There's only 2 of those possible, though. An ace 8 suited, only 3 of those possible. And, 2s, 4s, 6s, 7s, stuff like that. Maybe 9s, 10s, or jacks. 9s and 10s aren't that likely. And jacks, I think, probably would have just stuck it in pre-flop. So here on the turn, I hit the 10, and I actually feel really good about my hand now. I didn't get raised on the flop, so it's a kind of wet flop, so I would expect him to raise a lot of his good hands, although he certainly could be slow playing an overpair, but again, I think he probably jams those in pre-flop. So what am I losing to here? Not really any 2-pair hands. I don't think he peeled the flop very often with a 10, maybe ace 10, so a 10, but not a okay, yeah, that's not good. Not a king 10 or a queen 10 or a jack 10. I mean, those are possible, but I don't think they're that likely. That was one of the reasons I c-bet the flop, was with the premise that he was going to be folding those. So I think a lot of the time he has a small pair. Now, this turn card doesn't really look like it's going to hit my range too hard. I can certainly have hands like ace 10, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, 9 10. Those are possible, but when I c-bet here on the turn, or if I were to bet, I think he would think a lot of the time maybe I had a draw, maybe I did have an overpair, or somehow had a set. Sets are pretty hard to make, so that's never going to be too much of your opponent's range when they're just going bet, bet, bet. And he could also think that I had a hand like ace king, ace queen, maybe ace jack, something like that, that I'm just trying to barrel him off of his pair, because he's pretty much indicated that he probably has a marginal hand. So when I keep betting, that doesn't really say that I have to have a great hand. It's just like I'm saying, okay, so you have a marginal hand, get out of here. So I decide I am going to bet for value, trying to get value from all those marginal hands. Also from draws, I think he's going to call or possibly just ship it with a draw. So then the question is bet size. Now, my bet size here may or may not have been ideal, but it comes from a little bit of a mathematical principle that I like, where I want to be able to set up the river so I can have around a pot size bet, or no more than a pot size bet, really. So when I'm trying to figure that out, what you do is you take the pot and you subtract it from the effective stack. So right here, the effective stack is 83, so we're going to subtract 3450 from that. So that's going to leave us just under 50. And then what you do is you divide that by 3. And if you divide that by 3, that'll give you the number that you would bet to leave a pot-sized river bet on the end. So if we took 50, so that's going to be about 16 or 17, really. So if we call it 17 plus 34, right, there's going to be 2 17s because our bet and his call. So 34 and 34 would be 68 in the middle. If you subtract 17, actually we should have gone with 16, right? That was a little closer. But if you subtract 17 from 83, what do you get? You get like 66. So what were we saying? 68, 66. So that's about right. So 17 would make sure that the river bet's going to be a little smaller than pot size. So I think that's what I do. I bet 17. 16 actually would have made it almost exactly pot size. Now I could have rounded it up more, like 19 or something like that. Here I'm giving him a credible shove, though. If he has some kind of a draw, that might or may not be correct. I might be better off bet folding here. I really don't know enough about how this opponent's going to behave to know that. But I've kind of decided, well, you know what? I 3-bet pre-flop with a sort of marginal hand, and then I hit it pretty good on the turn. And there's so many draws he could have. There's so many draws I could have that he's trying to just get me to get it in with or get me to fold, that I feel committed here. And he does call. And then the river is pretty much the blankiest blank. Deuces got there, pocket 2s. That really didn't complete any 2-pair hand. A hand like ace-4 of diamonds, ace-4 of clubs did just make a wheel, so that's bad. But at the same time, both flush draws missed. All of the larger straight draws, which I think are more likely than the ace-4. Also, when he looks at my hand, and if I were to say ship this river, he's going to look at it and say, well, he could have clubs, he could have diamonds, he could have queen jack, jack 9 suited, 6-7 suited. So many straight draws and so many flush draws missed that I do like betting here and sort of making it look like it's either a bluff or it's a really big hand. And the thing is that when you make it look like a bluff or a really big hand, it's really easy for your opponent to say to themselves, well, there aren't that many big hands. I mean, what could you have? Ace-4 suited. Yeah, I could have that, I guess. And sets, and then maybe like aces and kings. Queens and jacks, maybe. Sure, maybe. But as you get down towards ace-10, king-10, queen-10, I think he's going to start thinking that those hands don't necessarily ship it here, and that those hands may or may not be in that range there. So when I start adding hands like 10-9 suited, it's really going to depolarize my range so that my value range is going to be pretty wide, and that actually sort of gives me the opportunity to bluff more. It gives me the right to do that. So I do just ship it, and he doesn't quite insta-fold there like like it looks in the replayer, but so he did fold. So that doesn't really necessarily tell us that much. He could have had a draw that whiffed. And that's the one thing about just shipping it, is that I don't give him a chance to bluff with a draw. So check raising the turn, or check raising the river, or just check calling the river even. Those all could be ways to get more money from his draws. At the same time, if I check the turn, he might check the turn back. And if I bet smaller on the river, he doesn't really have that much room to ship over it and make it convincing unless I make a really small river bet. So I think it's kind of hard to induce bluffs. And if I am going to induce bluffs, I'm probably going to lose a lot of value from his marginal made hands, like 4s, 6s, 7s, those sorts of things, which I think are going to call me, or at least going to think about calling me ace-8. I think that's going to snap call me here, just because there are so many bluffs I can have here. So that's hand of the day 1. I hope you've enjoyed it and or learned something. Leave your questions or comments on the website, and I'll be happy to analyze the hand in further depth together. Getting a good dialogue going about individual hands is a great way to learn poker. And I think the line between teacher and student is at times a bit artificial. So I hope you join me, and thanks for watching.